Skeletons and zombies are two of the most iconic undead monsters in Dungeons and Dragons. They are the basic foot soldiers of the undead, the bodies dug up from old graves, the unlucky villagers raised by a necromancer, the ancient dead still lingering in tombs, crypts, ruins, and battlefields. And mechanically, they have always had a pretty simple dynamic. Skeletons tend to be the backliners. They shoot from a distance, usually with a short bow, and pull out a blade if enemies get too close. Zombies tend to be the frontliners. They slowly stumble forward, absorb damage, and slam whatever gets in their way. That dynamic works. Skeletons support from range. Zombies hold the front. But honestly, it has always felt a little too simple to me. When I think of skeletons in fantasy games, I do not just think of basic archers standing in a room waiting to be destroyed. I think of bones scattered across a crypt floor, only for them to suddenly pull themselves together when the party gets too close. I think of skeletons faking their death, collapsing into piles, and making players question whether that pile of bones in the corner is actually harmless. And when I think of zombies, I do not really think of them slamming people as their main threat. In most movies, shows, and games, zombies grab people. They drag them down. They bite. The bite is the iconic zombie attack. So with these revisions, my goal was not to turn skeletons and zombies into complicated monsters. The goal was to make them feel more like what they are supposed to be. Skeletons should be deceptive, persistent, and annoying to fully get rid of. Zombies should be slow, durable, and dangerous once they get their hands on you. So first, let's start with the skeleton. This version of the skeleton is still very recognizable. Regarding its core statistics, I haven't changed much aside from its armor class, but I did make a few changes. The first major change is armor class. This skeleton has an AC of 15 from a chain shirt. That might seem like a small detail, but I think it helps sell what these creatures are. Skeletons are not always just random bones. Sometimes they're the remains of old soldiers, guards, adventurers, or warriors buried with their equipment. If they died in armor, it makes sense that the armor may still be there. And mechanically, AC 15 lets the skeleton survive a little longer without making it bulky. It still only has 13 hit points. If the party hits it with bludgeoning damage, it folds quickly. But against ordinary attacks, it has just enough protection to be annoying. The second small change is the weapon. Instead of a short bow, this skeleton uses a light crossbow. Part of that is honestly just aesthetic. I like the image of an undead guard or old soldier slowly raising a crossbow in a dark crypt. But it also fits the way I picture this version of the skeleton. It is not some elite archer gracefully firing shot after shot. It is a dead thing using a simple, reliable weapon. A crossbow feels a little more deliberate, a little more mechanical, a little more fitting for a corpse that does not need elegance. The melee option is still a short sword because the skeleton needs something to fall back on if enemies close the distance. But the real changes are in the traits. First is skeletal fortitude. This is the skeleton's answer to undead fortitude, but it works differently. The zombie refuses to die in the moment. The skeleton comes back later. If damage reduces the skeleton to 0 hit points, and it is not killed outright, it reassembles itself in 1d4 days unless the damage was radiant or from a critical hit. That is important because this trait does not necessarily make the current fight harder. Instead, it makes the dungeon more dangerous. If the party destroys a group of skeletons and moves on, those skeletons may not be gone forever. If they do not finish them properly, they might return later. That creates a different kind of pressure. Maybe the party clears the first room of a crypt, keeps going deeper, and then later realizes the skeletons behind them are starting to come back. Maybe they clear out a tomb, collect their reward from a town, and a few days later the same undead rise again because the party never truly destroyed them. That is the kind of thing I want from skeletons. They should feel like old bones that refuse to stay still. Then we have pilo bones. This is probably the trait that most defines this revision. As a bonus action, the skeleton can disassemble itself and become a pile of bones. While it is disassembled, It can still perceive its surroundings, but it cannot take actions, bonus actions, or reactions unless it is reassembling itself. It can also use this ability as a reaction when it takes damage, but if it does, it has to spend an action to reassemble instead of a bonus action. This does a few things. First, it lets the skeleton hide in plain sight. A pile of bones in a crypt does not automatically look like an enemy. That gives the DM a very easy ambush tool. Second, it lets the skeleton fake being destroyed. If the party is not paying attention, a skeleton collapsing into bones might look like it is dead, but a few moments later, it might pull itself back together. Third, it makes the battlefield less trustworthy. A room full of corpses and bones is no longer just decoration. It becomes a question: are these remains harmless, or are they waiting? That is the design goal for the skeleton. It is not meant to be a huge damage dealer. It is not meant to be a boss. It is meant to make players second-guess the environment. Now, let's move to the zombie. The revised zombie keeps the same basic idea as the original. It is slow. It has terrible armor class. It has okay hit points for a low-level undead creature. And it has undead fortitude, which gives it that classic not dead yet feeling. But the major change is how it attacks. In this version, the zombie has 2 attacks listed: bite and slam. The bite is the zombie's signature attack. It deals piercing damage plus necrotic damage, but it can only be made if the target is grappled, paralyzed, or restrained. It is also made with advantage. That restriction is important. The zombie does not just walk up and casually bite someone. It needs to get control of the target first. That is where slam comes in. When a zombie hits with slam, it deals bludgeoning damage, grapples the target, and then immediately makes a bite attack against that target. This completely changes how the zombie feels. Instead of just walking up and dealing a little damage, the zombie now has a clear combat loop. It grabs, it bites, and then the player has to deal with that. A zombie that lands its slam is not just dealing damage. It is locking the target in place, forcing the target to escape, and setting up future attacks. That makes the zombie in action economy problem. Every action spent escaping a grapple is an action not spent attacking another monster. Every turn spent dealing with a zombie that has grabbed you is a turn where the rest of the encounter gets worse. And that is exactly what I want zombies to do. They should not be graceful. They should not be tactical geniuses. They should not be fast. But if they get close enough to put their hands on you, things should start going wrong. This also makes groups of zombies much scarier. 1 zombie grappling a character is manageable. 2 or 3 zombies doing it can become a serious problem. Once 1 zombie has a target grappled, the others can crowd in. The target's movement is gone, the bite attacks become easier to justify, and suddenly the party has to start spending resources to pull someone out. That feels much more like a zombie horde to me. Not dangerous because each individual zombie is impressive, but dangerous because they overwhelm you, pin you down, and make escape harder than it should be. And undead fortitude still supports that. Even when a zombie should be dead, there's always the chance it stays up at 1 hit point. So now, instead of just being a sack of hit points, the zombie becomes a creature that wastes time, eats actions, and keeps pressure on the party. That is the big difference between the skeleton and the zombie. The skeleton controls uncertainty. The zombie controls space. The skeleton makes you question what is safe. The zombie makes it difficult to move once it reaches you. And when you use them together, that is where they start to shine. Zombies belong in the front, trying to grab characters and hold them in place. Skeletons belong behind them, firing crossbows, hiding among bone piles, or waiting for the party to get distracted before reassembling. The zombie creates the problem directly in front of the party. The skeleton punishes the party for focusing too much on that problem. For example, imagine the party enters a crypt chamber. There are a few corpses on the floor and a couple piles of bones near the walls. The zombies start shambling forward. The party engages them. 1 zombie lands a slam, grapples a character, and bites them. Now, the players are focused on getting that character free. Then the bone piles start moving. The skeletons reassemble, raise their crossbows, and start firing from the edges of the room. Suddenly, the party is not just fighting zombies. They are dealing with a battlefield that changed underneath them. That is the kind of encounter I want these monsters to create. Not overly complex, not unfair, just more dynamic than the zombie slams and the skeleton shoots. The important thing is that both monsters are still simple. The skeleton has 2 weapons and 2 traits. The zombie has 2 attacks and 1 trait. Neither stat block is bloated, but they each have a clearer identity now. The skeleton is deceptive and persistent. The zombie is controlling and relentless. And that means even low-level undead can stay interesting longer, because the goal is not always to make a monster stronger. Sometimes the goal is to make the monster behave more like itself. Skeletons should not just stand there until they break. Zombies should not just slap people until they die. Skeletons should wait, collapse, reassemble, and return. Zombies should grab, bite, and refuse to let go. That is the heart of these revisions. They're still basic undead. They are still easy to understand. But now, they give the players something more interesting to react to.